Okay, so the last chapter that we're actually going to lecture on and study before we do our group reports and projects for each country is chapter 12 on tourism. You also have a homework assignment based on tourism. I don't know if that was already due or will be due, but this is kind of what it's based on. It's this idea of questions like, do you have a passport? And this idea, not this idea, just questions that I normally want to know from you, like where have you traveled in the United States? Where have you traveled outside of the United States? Why do you want to travel if you want to travel? Passports are about $75. You can apply for one through the post office. You have to get these little pictures from Walgreens or CVS or something and then apply. They do take a while to come back in. So it's nice to just have one on the go. Like you can't just go somewhere, right? You have to take time. Or you can pay a lot more money, like even double and expedite it. Actually, we have not we, but New Orleans has a passport like office. There are only like 2 or 3 in the States. And there's one in New Orleans, so if you just really had to get one in a pinch, you could go there, but it would just be expensive. So, you know, though, some people don't want to travel. Some people don't really have a strong desire to see other places. It happens. It's kind of this natural thing. I have a friend that I met when I was in college, and we worked at a camp together, and she is like a yes person. Hey, Mandy, do you want to go? Yes. Like, it doesn't matter when, where, how long, what time of day. I mean, overseas, here. I mean, it's like, yeah, let's on the go. But she married a guy from Macomb, Mississippi, who is like a stay person. It's the craziest thing because he thinks her coming to Jackson to visit us, you know, is like a really big trip, you know. It's about an hour and a half, but it's just to the dangerous capital city, you know. And so, you know, here she is, would just blow almost all of her money on gas and just hit the road. And now, you know, well, now she has kids too. It's a little harder, but there's just this like stay time. So I encourage you to really ask yourself how important that is to you, or if it's just fun but not important, or what's going on. Tim and I had a non-negotiables conversation before we got engaged, when we were talking about possibly getting engaged or possibly getting married. And this is my free marital advice, but we basically said, you know, what are the things that you want to do in life that if we end up getting married and you don't get to do, that you'll really resent me. Like, there are things you really want to do, and if I get in the way of those, like, it's a big deal. And I know that sounds silly, but, you know, I didn't want to marry him and then something happen in like 30 years, be like, well, I never did that because of you, you know. And but what was interesting, we each had about 2 or 3 things that were really important to us, but both of us said that it was really important to have like an open mind to moving, or an open mind to like spending money to experience other things, and to experience other cultures, or to just like give our children the opportunities to travel or meet other people. Like, it was, we had a different way of saying it, but it was basically this idea that, you know, I don't want to be stuck somewhere. I want that flexibility to go and know people and see other parts of the world if something comes up. Not like, neither one of us are just like looking for something else. But that was kind of a non-negotiable. Like, if opportunities come up and you keep me from them, you know, or if you kind of say, no, like, I'm absolutely not going to go do this or that, then I may slowly start to resent you. We have an opportunity next summer, this is kind of crazy, to go with our children and stay in Peru for 5 weeks, like, and teach English in Peru during the summer. And I'm thinking, you know, when I first told him about it, he was like, well, that might be awesome, you know, how much money, of course. But, you know, that's something that if somebody would have said, absolutely not, that's ridiculous, well, yeah, I'd be disappointed. And how many disappointments can you handle before you start to get really frustrated, or there starts to be tension? So I think it's important to know how comfortable and how important it is to you, so that you can communicate that to other people. Like, this is important to me. I want the opportunity to go on mission trips, to send our children places. Like, what does that look like? If you remember from chapter 1, 2 million people cross international borders daily. Now, that's not all for travel, but it is a lot of people moving around. This is chapter 10, not chapter 12. The world's top 10 tourism destinations from 2008. France is the top tourism destination. I've actually been to France. You'll hear a story or two probably, but I turned 21 in Paris. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. My birthday is near or around Thanksgiving every year. And when I was 21, I was a junior in college, and my uncle was stationed in Ramstein, Germany with the Air Force. And my aunt, he had been there for a while, and my aunt wanted to visit him, and it was the holidays and that kind of thing, but she's never even been on a plane, you know, so here she is like wanting to maybe go to Germany. She was really nervous about it, and I had traveled a bit, so it was my birthday, and me and two of my friends just said, hey, we'll, you know, accompany my aunt, you know, to Germany, and we did. We like got her on the plane, we got, you know, we saw the Air Force Base, we actually stayed off base, and then, and she stayed with him. And we kind of like did our own thing for a little while, and we met back up and did our own thing and met back up. And so we took a train on my birthday, or the day before my birthday, into Paris, and then stayed for like 36 hours and came back. So yeah, I can actually say I had dinner on the Eiffel Tower on my 21st birthday. So France is the number 1, Spain is number 2, and the US is number 3. I'm curious, you know, if we did a thing like people coming from other countries, where they want to go in the U.S. DC, New York, San Francisco, Disney World, Disneyland. I don't know. Probably not Mississippi. China is number 4. Then Italy. You guys don't have to remember these. These are just to let you know. Then the United Kingdom, which would include Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland. Germany. The Ukraine is number 8. It's kind of interesting. And Turkey is number 9. Like in the world. And then Mexico is number 10. Which Mexico and different parts of the world have different danger zones, you know, at different times in history. So right now, it is not a safe time to be in Mexico or parts of Central and South America. So when we're thinking about communicating in these tourism contexts, who's communicating? Who's there? Well, as you see on the PowerPoint, the tourist and the host, right? The people who are going on a trip, and then the people who live there, or the people who are there for work. And so the tourists are the people who are traveling. Well, why are they traveling? Well, people have lots of different motivations. Would you like to go on a trip for historical reasons? A lot of people want to go to see things from a historical perspective, like the Holy Land, or Gettysburg, or you know, Egypt, and see the old pyramids, like things that you're going for and you're seeing like where something happened. I stood where the so-and-so happened. Some people just want to party, so they go places like the Mediterranean or Cancun or on a cruise, like that kind of thing. Like, I'm just going to hang out and have a good time. Some people just hear about things, like I just want to check it out. I want to see what it is. I've heard about the Great Wall. I've heard about safaris, so I want to go, that kind of thing. Or a service trip. People will go and travel to poorer places to teach English or work with orphans or build like construction kind of things. So there are lots of different motivations for the tourists to travel. And the hosts are the residents of each region. And that traveling can kind of have a positive or a negative impact on that native culture. Okay, so wherever they are, if all of a sudden it becomes like a tourism destination, then it can have both. It can be a good thing and a bad thing for the natives. The good thing is basically that it sends, it gives the people there a strong sense of pride in their culture. We live in a place where people want to be, or they want to come. Like I made that joke a minute ago about probably not Mississippi, right? Mississippi does not have that tourism pride, like people coming to our area, like, but if we did have something, we'd say, oh, well, if you come here, we have this. And so it does impact it, because it gives, if you're in a naturally popular place, you feel like, man, I got it good. People want to be here. The negative side is there typically tends to be a lot more crime in touristy spots, and people, native people who live there tend to lose their daily life. What I mean by that is the whole city, the whole town, the whole place sort of revolves around this tourism-y type of culture, and so they kind of lose that concept of just daily normal life outside of that. If you live in a place where a lot of people come in, your whole life is sort of based on what they're doing. And so based on that, if you look at, this should be another slide. There should be another slide in here. I'll make a note and try to make sure by the time the video is there. But hosts can respond 3 different ways. Hosts can respond 3 different ways. How do they respond? Okay, so if the host of or the native people really of the place where they're living, they kind of do 3 different things: retreat, resist, or embrace. I don't know why I feel like always going retreat, resist, embrace, retreat, resist. I don't know. It doesn't mean anything. But to retreat, basically that's a situation where the host would sort of hide from the tourist. They kind of just stay out of the way. People who live there and they think, I'm not really interested in getting into all this. They kind of avoid contact. Now this usually happens when the people of a place understand that those tourists are necessary. Like it's good economic gain, so they're kind of like, we need the tourists here, but I don't want to have to deal with them. And so they kind of stay back. They may feel a little bit invaded by tourists, but try to just, stay out of like the busy sections. When we went on a cruise once, and we went to Honduras. And in Honduras, where you port your cruise, which is a really big cruise port there, it's actually like a small island off of the mainland of Honduras, and it's called Roatan. And so you port, and all these cruise boats come into Roatan, and the whole island is basically catered to those cruise ships, So like when you're there, they have like private beaches you can go to, or you can zip line in the jungle, or you can, swim with the whatever, some kind of animal, or go down this jungle creek. I mean, they have all these things that you can do, and almost the entire island is for that purpose. Now that makes a ton of money for the country. However, people who are not working in that industry, they tend to stay on the mainland. This is kind of the native people of Honduras, and then some of them may even take a ferry and work on the island and then go back. But the island itself is sort of like this totally separate part of the country that's really just a moneymaker, look at beautiful Honduras, and if you go inland, if you go and see, where the people actually live, it's a completely different experience. So I think that's a little bit interesting, where there's some places where there's a whole, like a divide. The second way they respond is by resisting. Now this can be passive aggressive, it could be deliberate, it could be ignoring someone. It can even get violent, I guess. And this is where crime, like if the hosts are the ones who are stealing or robbing from the tourist. But this could also just be an attitude thing of, I'm not going to help you, or I'm not going to pretend that I understand you. The other thing that happens, and the final thing the host can do, is to embrace it. I mentioned that pride that comes from a host place. There's this idea of revitalization. Some communities just actively invest money to draw in more tourists, and when they market their culture in such a way, they start to realize, and they start to rediscover their own history and their own worth, so they sort of just really take that on and take a lot of pride in that. Sometimes a whole culture of host can be this way, one or the other, so like the example in Honduras, there's a culture of retreating, they have their own homeland. There probably are places, maybe in the Middle East because of our tension there, or the issues in Mexico right now, where there is more resistance, right? So the whole culture tends to resist more. Or like an embrace, the Caribbean is really big about just embracing tourism. Come on, man, that kind of idea. So, but even within a country, you can have all of these, right? So you can have people in France who do all of this: embrace it, resist it, retreat. So that's individual and cultural. Now, there are 4 characteristics of these encounters when you actually have these encounters. And we'll walk through, what happens when tourists and hosts come into contact with each other. The first one is that it's limited. That contact is very limited. That limitation of communication, it might actually give us the wrong impression. When I went to France, I was in Paris for 36 hours. I go back to my college dorm room, and here I am, the expert on France. Oh, people in France are like this, or people in France, maybe not. I had a very limited exposure to French people, and to say that I would be, know how they would do something or what they would do would be a little bit ignorant of me. However, Tim spent almost a year, I think 10 months in France teaching English after he graduated college, lived with French people, worked in a French school, was in the French system, and kind of like in the countryside. He wasn't in like a touristy area. He would have a lot more validity to come back and say, here's how I experienced the French people. This is what I think they were. And so sometimes things look really different on the surface than they do in reality. The second characteristic is that it's short-term and transitory. Tourists rarely stay in one place for very long. If we go to Europe and we say, all right, we have a 10-day trip to Europe, all expenses paid, if money's not an issue, people tend to want to go as many places as they can in that short period of time. Some people would say a new place each day, or at least, and that puts us in each place 2 to 3, maybe 4 days maximum. What are you going to get to know as far as the actual culture of that place? Well, not much. The motivation there is to see as much as possible, to try foods or to see buildings and things like that, but not to actually experience the people and the language and the land. And so there's a lack of motivation there. And just know that that's what's happening. Don't say that I'm going to learn a culture when you're not there for very long. The third thing is that it's commercialized. Really recognize that economies that thrive on tourism, they make that traditional culture really pocket-sized. They like bring it down to you, so that you'll buy it. When Tim and I were on our honeymoon, we went to Sedona, Arizona, and we visited the Navajo Nation in Arizona, up north, and we ended up stopping in or on this elderly man and woman were selling things, like a little trade space, and there were these like not bows, but like arrows with like arrowheads and these dream catchers, and we thought this will be a great thing to buy for all the people who helped in our wedding, like a souvenir for like the helpers of the wedding. And so we brought back like 10 or 15 little bows, that were this, arrows that were like this big, and dream catchers that were like this big. And looking at it now, I'm thinking that's exactly an example of them taking something that is significant to their history, right? Making bows and arrows and hunting buffalo with them, right? Like, this little thing's not going to like killing buffalo, but they're willing to sort of scale it down and give you just a taste, really to make money, knowing that that's kind of what it is. So they want you to get a feeling for it, but they also know that they have to do that to make money. And then it's also really unbalanced. That's the fourth characteristic. When you're a tourist, you are usually off work, hanging out, on vacation, just kind of playing. You're away from your normal mundane life. However, for the host, it's their job to make this a good experience for you. So while you're just hanging out with cash in your pocket, they're working really hard. This is when you went to go, zip line through the rainforest. That was so exciting and so much fun, and they just like woke up and went to work again, even though if it's at a zip line in the rainforest. So it's still that menial work. It can bring a lot of family stress, and the tourist seems to have the upper hand. They're accommodating the tourist, and they're the worker, and so we always have this, attitude. So given these characteristics, that contact is limited, it's short-term and transitory, it's commercialized and unbalanced, there are times when an encounter will be more likely to be negative. For example, if tourists visit historically unfriendly places, there are a lot of religious or value differences. So if we go to the Middle East, for example, there are a lot of value differences going on there between the Muslim cultures, or even economic differences. But it can be really positive if tourists are friendly and respectful, and they demonstrate an interest in the country and culture beyond just the beaches, and in this case, sometimes the host would perceive the tourist more like a guest rather than just a lot of work to be done. Especially when tourists would take the opportunity to be more extensive with their interaction with locals, more friendly. Sometimes that's awkward, and sometimes people don't want to just talk to strangers, but that can lead to more of a positive interaction. The final listing, the final four, the last slide, when you're in these settings, when you have a tourism setting, when I'm going and I'm going to travel and hang out, there are a couple of communication challenges that sort of occur. The first one is a search for authenticity. A search for authenticity. A lot of tourists want to experience the real culture of a place, the real culture of a visited community. I want to see what it's really like, but it's very rare that you actually would get to do this. Host communities sort of alter their daily life so that they can give you a picture of something. Think about something like a luau in Hawaii. Luau's for native Hawaiians hold a significant, a valuable, significant experience. Like it used to be for very special occasions, spiritual reasons, a wedding maybe, something like that. Like it was a big deal to throw a luau. That was part of, their culture. That was not something you just did every day or every weekend even. But now, if you go to Hawaii and you pay $50 a head, you can go to a luau any day or time, any time of day, any day of the week. What we call that is staged authenticity. Stage, like S-T-A-G-E-D, stage, like on a stage. They basically perform something that would be significant, but they're just kind of giving you the show of it. These kind of things can lead to stereotypes, but people are really willing to do that because it does tend to bring in a lot of money. We have this customer attitude a lot of when we're tourists. We are paying the money, we've saved up a lot of money to do this, and we want to see what we can. When we were in Arizona, we were listening to a Lakota Indian share, some about his tribe. I've never heard of Lakotas before I was there, and he was talking, and he tells a story about the Lakotas and how it's important that they do something called the sun dance. So you've heard of rain dances for different Native Americans. Well, they do something yearly called the sun dance, and here's what happens. And he explains all this in great detail. But basically, there is like a maypole in the middle of a sunny area, and then different men who are considered elders or worthy, whatever they consider that to be, are participating in this each year. And what they do is they connect themselves to the maypole by driving a stake through a part of their skin on their chest. So there's like a stake going through skin on their chest, and it's connected to this pole, right? They are there in the middle, connected to this pole. Their wives are sitting under the shade trees nearby, singing and chanting. And for days, these men don't eat or drink. They just dance or chant or do these things around this pole, and they stay there until the stake makes its way through their skin, until it comes out on its own. And it's a pride thing to have been asked to do this, to be worthy to do this. And so the man talking to us showed us all of the scars, on his chest all the way down, of the times that he has experienced this as a deeply spiritual thing. that has these pride markers. And he's just telling us about this. And a man in the back of the room raised his hand during the question time and said something like, "Where can we go to watch this?" I didn't know what the Lakota man was going to say or do. He looked highly offended because he's saying, here, I'm just telling you one of our most sacred traditions. It happens once a year. He was pretty polite in saying, you can't see this, but we have that mentality. The man asking the question, we're at a resort, listening to this, presentation on it. So he's still in that, like, touristy mindset. Like, I want to see, I want to do, we're really consumerist. And we really want this picture in our head. We have to be really careful about this. If I were to say, we are going to go to a poor area of Africa and we're going to, experience the culture, the African culture, typically you would have some sort of idea in your head of what that's going to look like. You've seen pictures of Africa, you've seen movies of Africa, so you think we're going to go to a village and it's just going to be like a lot of red dirt, and women are going to be wearing like wraparound clothes with babies on their backs, and children may be running around naked, and we're going to have lots of like piercings and paintings and mud floors, mud huts, like this kind of idea, like eat rice every day. And we get there, and all of a sudden, we take a taxi on a paved road, and there's a shopping mall and brick homes and electricity and running water and women in Western clothes. And some of you would be disappointed. Some of you would be really frustrated, like, wait a minute, like, this is just like going to Chicago or some other place, if it were that men and women on cell phones doing business. And it looked like, an industrialized city. Like, let's check our motives about that, because what we're saying when we want that is we would rather see something like a third world culture experience than allow these people to be civilized, industrialized. You know what I mean? Like, that's a real gut check for me, because I even have that thing where, I want to see how it's different, and then if it's the same, how boring would that be, right? But electricity, running water, paved roads, those things, we need to be really careful about what our expectations are, especially for places that we consider to be less privileged than us. I'll just say it that way. The second one, the last three are kind of faster. The second one is that there are social norms and expectations that you kind of have to be aware of when you travel places. How should you interact in public? Can you hold hands with the opposite sex, even if it's your husband? How do you greet people on the street? Should you look at them? That kind of thing. So there's interacting in public, and then there's also stuff like shopping. Should you barter and try to change the price? Can you touch merchandise? Can you try things on, bring it back? I'm really uncomfortable bartering. Like if they say it's $15, I really have a hard time going, I'll give you $8, especially when I'm willing to pay $15, so it's kind of this but if it's a culture that expects bartering, for you not to barter almost seems so much that you're so much better than them, like you're so much higher than them. Oh, here, take my $15. So you have to be really careful about that and try to actually abide by the norms that are there. The third one is called culture shock, and you've probably heard of this a lot. It's this idea that you feel disoriented or shocked by things happening around you. There are stages of culture shock. Normally when you go somewhere, you kind of start off on this high, and it usually lasts a little while, like you love this place. And for people who are touring and not staying for a while, I'd say maybe less than 10 days. That's kind of what stays there. People they like it. They still like it, and they come back with a great attitude. But if you stay there for a longer period of time, there are these waves of culture shock that come in. One, you start off and you get there and you're like, wow, wow, wow. And then it takes about 10 days to 2 weeks before you go, boom. this place is terrible. These people smell. They don't do this right. They didn't ask this. They're taking too long for my food. They're not even open when they say they're going to be open. Like, it gets to this point where now everything is not good, and you want to just, like, you think they're backwards, you know? And then eventually, it sort of levels out where you accept it and it's normal and it's okay. Something that happens also is called reverse culture shock. Once you get to that point in another culture where this is okay and this is even keel for you and you can accept that culture, when you come back, like back to America for Americans, when you get back, something called reverse culture shock is you get here and all of a sudden you like hate it. You think we're backwards, we're messed up. I remember coming back from China the first time I came back, and it was like the first day or the second day, and I had to go to Walmart, and that was just a reverse culture shock in and of itself. Walmart, so big. These people think they can get everything. But I remember being angry in the parking lot, like really, like angry, like I'm mad at the parking lot, thinking about the people who were waiting for parking spaces. You know, and I was like, this is ridiculous. People in other countries walk to their store, not, you know, I mean, just everything. So I was like parking in the last, you know, space just for, and I did that for probably 2 weeks, and then, like, you know, now I'm like, excuse me, are you leaving soon? I'll just wait here while you know, it's just one of those things, like, but that immediate thing called reverse culture shock. And the thing is how bad culture shock or how much culture shock you experience depends on a couple of things. Like, if you are an American and you go to Germany, or really, like, say you go to London, where they even speak English, culture shock there is not going to be as bad for you as it would be if you go to Vietnam, right? So depending on how different the cultures are and different the languages are, that really impacts how different the cultures are. I mean, how bad the culture shock is, excuse me. So, you know, you've got London, which shouldn't be too much culture shock, but then you've got something like Germany, where the people and the culture tend to be similar, but the language barrier can cause a frustration. And then you have, you know, Vietnam, where the culture's different, the language is different, the people I mean, everything's different. And so, obviously, the culture shock's going to be stronger there. The other thing that depends on culture shock is how immersed, like I said, you are in the culture. So, if you're going to be there for a short period of time, you're not going to experience much culture shock at all. You're not going to have time everything's still going to be exciting and new and cool. If you're there for a long time, that's kind of when culture shock sort of comes in, and how immersed you are in the culture. So staying at a hostel, you know, with lots of internationals coming in and out, versus staying in someone's home, that's going to, you know, you're much more immersed in someone's home than in a hostel, so that will be really different. The sad thing is, tourists who tend to experience culture shock usually take it out on the host, right? The hosts are the crazy people, you know, they're the ones that smell bad. They're the ones that they kind of patronize the local culture. They start to not like it. And so that kind of gets to be really a sad point. You know, wait a minute, this is their home, you know, and you're the one who chose to come here. So everyone's really affected by culture shock. And the last one's language. It's exactly, you know, what it sounds like. You can't possibly learn the language of any culture you may ever want to go to. So a lot of people just choose to go to English-speaking countries, right? Like, I will travel to English-speaking countries, or where I know there will be a lot of English speakers. There's two sides to speaking a language, though. One is not understanding the words coming out of their mouth, right? So if you played ba-fa, then it would be like being in the beta, or going to the beta group, where you have no idea what they're saying. But there are also rules about conversations. You may speak the same language, but not know what's acceptable or not acceptable to talk about. So if you played ba-fa, the alpha culture, you know, they spoke English, but there were a lot of rules about how the organization of a conversation had to occur. And so, but some cultures help and provide more with language than others. And luckily for Americans, help in English is usually more, you know, accessible than help in other languages. But the United States, I mean, we don't really, unless you go to Disney World, you know, and in some places Spanish, you know, like I flew out of Miami and everything was bilingual in Miami. But we don't tend to really help a lot of foreigners out with language, and language can cause a lot of frustration and a lot of headache and a lot of miscommunication and cultural mistakes. Finally, there are reasons and there are impacts on tourism that you can't control. Social, political impacts. Political impacts like 9/11 really changed the airline industries and how we travel through the air and what that looks like. It also changed it changed flights coming to and from the Middle East, right? And having it, we also changed a lot of our like our coming into the States, like visas and things. 9/11, and then other environmental things like. For example, Hurricane Katrina really messed up tourism on the Gulf Coast of New Orleans for a long time. And those are, New Orleans is a big tourism market. When I first applied to go work in China, it was for the summer of 2003. And I was almost completely ready to go, but my visa was denied. And it was denied, or it was actually revoked. I was granted the visa, and then it was revoked because of an outbreak of SARS. I don't know if you remember SARS, but they all had to wear masks, and it was just kind of an illness that was kind of going around in China at the time. So then I went back the next year. Well, when Tim and I went to China in 2009, the swine flu broke out here in the States. And so here I am again thinking, man, like I can never go to China because some epidemic is going to occur. And we did go to China, and they allowed us in. However, before anyone could get off the plane, these men and women in like astronaut suits and gas masks like came in and like took everyone's temperature on the plane. And if you had an elevated fever, then you had to be quarantined, or you had to do these other things. And it was really intense. They did not want you bringing illnesses in. But obviously these things don't affect all areas of tourism, right? Planes coming in from Vietnam weren't being affected. It's very specific when something occurs, like when 9/11 occurred, tourism to New York was affected. But tourism to the Gulf Coast was not, right? So, I mean, things occur, and they're typically, if they are impacted, it's not tourism worldwide. It's something in that general area. So that is chapter 10 on tourism, and that will be part of your final exam.